It began with coffee. The kind of coffee I hated, too sweet, drowning in syrup, topped with whipped cream. Emily never drank it either, not in all the years I knew her. She was the black coffee, no sugar type, and we used to joke about the people who turned their coffee cups into desserts. But there it was, sitting half-finished on the counter one Saturday morning, its cheap vanilla scent filling the kitchen. I'd gotten up early to take a work call, and Emily wasn't home. Her purse was gone, too. My first thought was practical. Maybe she'd gone to grab groceries, or maybe it belonged to a friend who'd dropped by. She came home an hour later, disheveled. Not a mess, exactly, but not how she'd usually present herself in public. Hair slightly tangled, a faint smudge of lipstick at the corner of her mouth. "Morning," she said brightly, dropping her bag on the chair. She kissed me on the cheek, a casual, almost distracted gesture. "Morning. You left early," I said, glancing at her bag. She gave me that smile of hers, the one that usually made me forget my own name. "Yeah. Needed to clear my head. Went for a drive, grabbed some coffee." She gestured to the cup on the counter. "You hate sweet coffee," I said before I could stop myself. For a fraction of a second, her expression froze. It was brief, so brief I might have missed it if I weren't already suspicious. Then she laughed. "I was craving something different. You know how it is." I didn't know how it was. I knew Emily, or at least I thought I did, and she didn't crave syrupy coffee or sneak out before sunrise. But I let it go, filing the moment away for later. That was the first crack. The second came 3 days later when I found the receipt. It was crumpled up in the trash, almost as if she tried to bury it. It wasn't for coffee, it was for flowers. A single bouquet of roses, paid for in cash. Emily never carried cash, and she certainly didn't buy roses for herself. Who were the roses for? I asked that evening, holding the receipt in my hand like evidence in a courtroom. Her eyes flicked to the paper, and she blinked, surprised. "Oh, those? They were for my mom. You know how much she loves fresh flowers." I nodded, pretending to accept the answer, but my gut said otherwise. Emily's mom had been out of town for weeks. Then there were the phone calls. Quiet, whispered conversations in the bedroom or out on the patio. She used to laugh freely on the phone with her friends, but these calls were different. Muted, cautious. One night, I stayed up late on the couch, pretending to fall asleep while Emily was still in the kitchen. I heard her phone buzz, followed by a soft giggle. The kind of giggle she hadn't aimed at me in months. I shifted slightly, pretending to stir in my sleep, and the sound stopped. A minute later, I felt her standing over me. "Matt?" she whispered. "You awake?" I didn't answer. She sighed softly and walked upstairs. By now, the cracks weren't just cracks, they were fractures. Something was happening, and I wasn't going to let it go unexamined. The final straw came on a Friday night. I was supposed to be at a work dinner, but it got canceled at the last minute. I didn't tell Emily. I wanted to surprise her. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark except for the faint glow of candles through the living room window. I stepped inside, quiet as a shadow. Laughter drifted from the living room. Emily's laugh, high and musical, but it was joined by someone else's. A man's voice, low, familiar. My heart pounded as I walked closer. I didn't barge in. I lingered in the hallway, listening. "You always pick the best wine," the man said. "You're just saying that because you like the company," Emily replied, her voice light and teasing. I couldn't stand it anymore. I stepped into the room. Emily froze, wine glass in hand. The man sitting next to her on the couch turned slowly, his face paling as he saw me. "Jake, my so-called buddy from the gym." "Matt," Emily said, her voice tight with forced calm. "What are you doing home?" Jake looked like a deer caught in headlights, his hand still holding the stem of his glass. "I could ask you the same thing," I said, my voice cold as ice. My gaze flicked to the half-burned candles, the expensive wine, and the way they were sitting, too close, too casual. Emily opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. "Don't," I said. "Not yet. Let me guess. You were catching up? Just two old friends." Jake stood abruptly, stammering something about leaving, but I wasn't finished. "Sit," I barked, and he froze. The room was thick with tension. the silence broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. Emily's face hardened, her mask of innocence slipping. "Matt," she said sharply, "don't make a scene." But it was too late for that. Emily's words hit me like a slap. Don't make a scene. A scene? Did she think this was about appearances? About keeping things tidy? Like the pristine throw pillows she obsessively arranged on the couch? My vision tunneled, my pulse roaring in my ears. Jake tried to stand again, mumbling, "I should go." This was, "Sit down." My voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that rooted him in place. I pointed to the chair across from the couch. He obeyed, sinking into it like a guilty child waiting for punishment. Emily rolled her eyes, crossing her arms. "You're overreacting, Matt. Jake and I were just having wine and talking." "That's it. Talking?" "By candlelight, with the wine we were saving for our anniversary." My words cut sharper than I intended, but I couldn't stop. "Do I look like an idiot to you, Emily?" Her lips tightened. "Don't twist this into something it's not." Jake cleared his throat, attempting to interject. "Hey man, it's not what you think. We're just friends. You know me." "Shut up." I turned on him, my fists clenched. "You're in my house, drinking my wine with my wife. You don't get to talk right now." Jake shrank back, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. Emily sighed dramatically, as if this entire confrontation were beneath her. "For God's sake, Matt, stop being so paranoid." Jake needed advice about a project at work, and I offered to help. "It's not a crime." I let out a humorless laugh. "Oh, you're helping him, all right? That's what this is? A business meeting?" I gestured at the cozy setup, the half-empty wine bottle, the subtle perfume that wasn't hers but lingered faintly in the air. Her tone turned icy. "You're embarrassing yourself." I stepped closer, my voice dropping low. "You think this is embarrassing? Embarrassing is your husband catching you playing house with another man. Embarrassing is you making me feel crazy for months, pretending I'm imagining things while you sneak around behind my back." She flinched at that, just slightly, but recovered quickly. "There's nothing to sneak around about." "God, Matt, you're acting like some insecure teenager." I turned to Jake, who was now staring at the floor like it held the answers to all his problems. "Let me guess. She told you we were having problems, didn't she? That I don't appreciate her, don't pay attention to her? That's the script, right?" He didn't answer, but the guilty flicker in his eyes was enough. Emily threw up her hands. "This is ridiculous. Jake and I haven't done anything wrong. If you're so insecure, maybe that's the real issue here." I barked a laugh, sharp and bitter. "Insecure? You think this is about insecurity? No, Emily, this is about trust. The trust you shattered the moment you let this guy into our space." Her mask cracked for the briefest moment, a flicker of frustration breaking through. "You're blowing this out of proportion. Nothing happened." I leaned in, my voice a dangerous whisper. "Nothing happened yet. But it's not because you didn't want it to. It's because I got here first." For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The tension was suffocating. Jake finally found his voice. "Look, man, I'm sorry. I should go." He stood up, moving quickly toward the door like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. "Yeah," I said, my voice dripping with venom. "You should." Jake paused at the door, looking back at Emily like he wanted to say something. She didn't meet his gaze. He left without another word. I turned back to Emily, who was now glaring at me like I was the villain of this story. "Do you feel better now?" Chased him off? "Great job, Matt." Her defiance was a slap in the face. I wanted to yell, to demand answers, but something inside me shifted. I was done fighting for someone who clearly didn't care. "Why?" I asked, my voice quieter now. "Why would you do this to us?" She scoffed. "Oh, spare me the martyr act. Our marriage hasn't exactly been a fairy tale, Matt. You're so busy with work, with your perfect plans. When was the last time you even asked how I was feeling?" It was a low blow and she knew it. My schedule had been brutal lately, but I'd always made time for her, or so I thought. Now I wasn't sure if anything I'd done had been enough. "So this is my fault?" I asked, my voice breaking despite myself. "You could have talked to me, Emily. Instead, you let this guy." Her expression hardened again. "This conversation is over." I'm not doing this with you right now. She stormed upstairs, leaving me alone in the wreckage of our living room. I stared at the candles, the wine, the place where Jake had sat. My hands were shaking, my chest hollow. The anger would come later. Right now, all I could feel was the weight of betrayal. Pressing down until I could barely breathe, I sat in the empty living room, staring at the remnants of their little rendezvous. The candles flickered weakly, their flames almost extinguished. The wine bottle, still half full, mocked me from the coffee table. The air was heavy with the lingering scent of her perfume and his cologne, blending into something toxic. The house was too quiet now. Upstairs, I could hear Emily moving around, drawers opening, her closet door creaking shut. She was probably pretending to cool off, like this was just another petty argument. It wasn't. This wasn't about who forgot to take out the trash or who left the lights on. This was war. I needed proof. Emily had lied so smoothly, like she'd been rehearsing for weeks. Nothing happened. I was overreacting. I was insecure. But I wasn't crazy, and I wasn't about to let her rewrite the narrative. I grabbed my phone and opened her laptop. The message notification I'd seen weeks ago, the one from Jake, was burned into my memory. If there were more, I'd find them. Her laptop was password protected, but she wasn't exactly creative. On my third try, I got in. Her email was clean. Her browsing history too clean. She wasn't stupid. But her social media messages? She hadn't thought to delete those. The first few messages were harmless. Friends, coworkers, nothing unusual. Then I found a string of conversations with Jake. It started innocently enough. Banter about gym routines, jokes about work. But as I scrolled, the tone shifted. His messages got bolder. Compliments on her appearance. Inside jokes I didn't understand. Mentions of grabbing coffee or hanging out while I was at work. And then, buried deep in the thread, a photo. Not explicit, but intimate in its own way. Emily, in a dress I'd never seen before, smiling in a way that felt private, meant only for him. The caption read, "Wish you were here." I stared at the screen, my hand trembling. My mind raced, piecing together the timeline. She'd worn that dress on a night she claimed to be out with the girls. I remembered asking her about it, teasing her for looking so fancy. She'd laughed and said, "A girl's gotta dress up sometimes." The betrayal hit like a second wave, pulling me under. This wasn't just flirting. This was calculated. I took screenshots of everything. Every message, every photo, every piece of evidence I could find. My heart pounded as I worked, the fury building with each discovery. Then I found something that made my blood turn cold. A draft email she'd written but never sent. It was addressed to Jake. "Jake, I can't stop thinking about last night. Feels like I'm alive for the first time in years when I'm with you. I hate sneaking around, but I don't know how to tell Matt. He's so predictable, so safe. I don't want to hurt him, but I can't pretend anymore." The email wasn't finished, but the damage was done. I stared at her words, each one slicing into me like a blade. Predictable, safe. That's how she saw me. I closed the laptop and sat back, trying to breathe through the rising storm of emotions. Anger, hurt, betrayal, humiliation. Upstairs, I heard her footsteps. She was coming down. I didn't move. I didn't trust myself to speak without exploding. Emily walked into the room, her arms crossed, her expression carefully neutral. She changed into sweats, her hair pulled back into a messy bun. The perfect image of someone trying to act unbothered. "Have you calmed down yet?" she asked, her tone clipped. I stared at her, my face blank. Calm isn't the word I'd use. She sighed. "Look, I'm sorry if tonight upset you, but you have to trust me. Nothing's going on with Jake. You're making this into something it's not." Her words were like gasoline on the fire inside me. "Nothing's going on?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "That's what I said," she snapped, her tone defensive. I pulled out my phone, opening the screenshots. Without a word, I held it out to her. She glanced at the screen, her expression faltering. Her lips parted slightly, as if to speak, but no words came. Her face drained of color as she swiped through the images. When she finally looked up, her eyes were wide, panicked. "You went through my stuff?" I laughed. a bitter sound that didn't feel like it came from me. That's what you're upset about? That I found out? Not that you lied to my face, or that you've been sneaking around with him. Her panic shifted to anger. You had no right to invade my privacy. Privacy? I shot back, my voice rising. You're married to me, Emily. You don't get to talk about privacy while you're sending photos to another man and writing love letters behind my back. She flinched but quickly recovered, her jaw tightening. You don't understand. It's not what it looks like. Then explain it to me, I said, stepping closer. Explain how I misunderstood. I can't stop thinking about last night. Go on. I'll wait. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape. When none came, she folded her arms again and said coldly, Fine. You want the truth? You've been checked out for months, Matt. You don't even see me anymore. Jake does. He makes me feel wanted. Her words were a slap, and I staggered under their weight. But underneath the pain, something inside me hardened. I smiled then, cold, calculated, and dangerous. Wanted, I repeated. Don't worry, Emily. You're going to feel a lot more than that when I'm done. She blinked, confused, and I walked past her, heading upstairs. Where are you going? She called after me, her voice tinged with fear. To plan, I said without looking back. Upstairs, the quiet of the bedroom felt suffocating. I shut the door behind me and leaned against it, my fists clenched at my sides. Emily's words echoed in my head like a cruel taunt. He makes me feel wanted. I wasn't sure what I hated more, her betrayal or the smug satisfaction she seemed to take in it. The way she stood there, defending her actions, as if I were the villain for discovering the truth. The anger boiled over, hot and volatile. But instead of erupting, it hardened into something colder, sharper. My mind began racing, calculating. She thought she could outmaneuver me, spin her lies until I was too exhausted to keep up. But she underestimated me. If she wanted to play games, I'd play, and I'd win. The next morning, Emily acted like nothing had happened. She avoided me over breakfast, her phone glued to her hand. I watched her out of the corner of my eye as I sipped my coffee. She was texting someone, probably Jake. Her thumb hovered over the screen, her expression shifting between annoyance and worry. Plans today? I asked casually, setting my mug down. She flinched, barely masking her surprise. No. Just running errands later. I nodded, keeping my tone neutral. Mind if I take the car? I've been meaning to get the tires checked. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She always used the car for her little excursions. Actually, I was going to use it. I need to pick up some things for the house. Really? What things? She hesitated, caught off guard by the question. Just groceries and cleaning supplies. I smiled faintly, leaning back in my chair. Sounds good. Let me know if you need help carrying anything. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, but the tension in her jaw remained. I wasn't making this easy for her, and she knew it. By the time she left, the house felt empty, almost hollow. I stayed behind not because I trusted her, but because I had a plan. This wasn't the time to chase her down or confront her again. No, I needed to let her feel secure, to think she was safe. I spent the next few hours preparing. Every move I made was deliberate, calculated. First, I combed through the screenshots again, organizing them into a timeline. Each message, photo, and moment was carefully labeled, ready to paint a picture she couldn't deny. Then I called a friend, a lawyer I trusted. I explained the situation without diving too deep into the emotions. Facts, I reminded myself. Stick to the facts. By the time we hung up, I had a clear understanding of my options. But that wasn't enough. I needed something bigger, something undeniable. I started setting up cameras. Small, discreet ones I'd picked up months ago for home security but never installed. One in the living room, one in the kitchen, and one in the bedroom. I didn't know when or if she'd slip up again, but I wanted to be ready. By the time Emily returned, I was sitting in the living room, scrolling through my phone. She walked in with a few grocery bags, her expression carefully neutral. You've been quiet today, she said, setting the bags on the counter. Just thinking, I replied. She paused, watching me like she was waiting for something. When I didn't say more, she busied herself putting the groceries away. Dinner plans? I asked casually, glancing at her. No, I'm tired. Long day. She was lying, and I didn't even have to try to catch it. The rest of the evening passed in tense silence. She stayed on her phone, scrolling aimlessly, while I pretended to read. My mind, however, was elsewhere. I needed to be patient, to wait for the right moment to strike. Came the next night. Emily said she was going out with a friend. Her tone was casual, but she avoided eye contact, her body language stiff. She left after dinner, her phone tucked into her pocket like a lifeline. The moment the door closed behind her, I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the cameras. The feed from the living room showed nothing at first, just the stillness of the house. But I wasn't interested in what was happening now. I wanted to know where she was going. Using a tracking app I'd discreetly installed on her phone weeks ago, I watched her location shift. She wasn't meeting a friend. She was heading to Jake's place. My heart pounded as I stared at the screen. I wanted to jump in the car and catch her in the act, but I forced myself to stay put. This wasn't the time. Instead, I waited. Hours later, Emily returned. She didn't bother sneaking in. She walked through the door like she owned the place, her face flushed and her hair slightly disheveled. She glanced at me, sitting in the same spot I'd been in all evening. "Hey," she said, her voice light, almost cheerful. "Still up?" I nodded, my expression blank. "Couldn't sleep." She hesitated for a moment, then shrugged. "Well, I'm going to bed. Long day tomorrow." As she walked past me, I caught a faint whiff of cologne. Jake's cologne. I didn't say anything. Not yet. Instead, I leaned back on the couch, staring at the darkened screen of my phone. I already knew how this was going to end. Waiting in the living room, my wife and her lover make coffee. I planned my ruthless revenge. The morning after her little outing with Jake, Emily acted like nothing had happened. She hummed softly as she made herself coffee, her every move casual, unbothered. But I could see it now, the cracks in her performance. Her cheerfulness was forced, her smile tight around the edges. She was playing her part, trying to keep the illusion intact. I played along. "Sleep well?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. "Yeah. You?" "Eventually," I replied, sipping my coffee. I didn't miss the way her eyes flickered to my face, searching for some sign of confrontation. When she didn't find any, she relaxed. Good. She needed to think I was backing off. The day passed uneventfully. Emily left for work, and I spent the hours preparing. I didn't need to confront her again. I already had the evidence. What I needed now was leverage. By the time she returned home, I had everything in place. Dinner was ready. Her favorite pasta dish, the one I hadn't cooked in months. The table was set, candles lit, wine poured. I wanted her to feel safe, comfortable. "Wow," she said, stepping into the dining room. "What's the occasion? Do I need a reason to spoil my wife?" I asked, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before returning the smile. "Guess not." We sat down to eat, the tension in the air so subtle it was almost imperceptible. Emily talked about her day, her voice light and breezy. I nodded, chimed in when appropriate, but mostly let her fill the silence. She didn't notice the way I was studying her, every word, every gesture. She didn't notice the way my mind was already 2 steps ahead. After dinner, I poured us both another glass of wine and leaned back in my chair. "Remember when we used to do this more often?" I asked, my tone casual. She blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift. "Yeah. Life just got busy, I guess." "Busy?" I repeated, swirling my wine. "That's one word for it." Her smile faltered. "What's that supposed to mean?" I set my glass down and met her gaze. "It means I think we should talk." Her defenses went up immediately. "About what?" "You, me, Jake." Her face went pale, but she recovered quickly, forcing a laugh. "Are we seriously doing this again? I told you, there's nothing going on." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, opening the screenshots. I slid it across the table to her. "Explain this, then," I said, my voice steady. Her eyes widened as she looked at the screen. The messages, the photos, the draft email she'd never sent. "Matt, I can." "Don't lie to me, Emily," I interrupted, my tone sharp. You've been lying to my face for months. This is your chance to tell me the truth." She sat there, frozen, her mouth opening and closing like she didn't know where to start. "Do you love him?" I asked, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Her head snapped up. "What? No, it's not like that." "Then what is it?" I demanded. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been cheating on me with him. You want to explain how I'm wrong." Her hands trembled as she set the phone down. It's complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Let me simplify it for you. You lied. You betrayed me. And now you're caught." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. "Not anymore. Matt, I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, her voice shaking. "I was lonely and Jake, he was there, but it didn't mean anything. I swear." I laughed, cold and humorless. "Didn't mean anything? Then why did you write that email? Why did you sneak around behind my back? Why did you come home smelling like his cologne?" She didn't have an answer. I stood up, towering over her. "You think I'm stupid, Emily? That I wouldn't figure it out? That I'd just let you keep humiliating me?" Tears streamed down her face now, but I wasn't done. "You want to know what I did today?" I asked, my voice calm, almost conversational. "I called a lawyer. I know exactly what my options are. And trust me, you're not walking away from this unscathed." Her breath hitched, panic flashing across her face. "Matt, please, we can fix this. I'll end it with Jake, I swear. It was a mistake." I leaned in close, my voice a deadly whisper. "The mistake wasn't Jake, Emily. The mistake was underestimating me." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her sitting there, broken and sobbing. Upstairs, I closed the bedroom door behind me and leaned against it, my heart pounding. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Emily didn't come down for breakfast. I didn't go looking for her. I had too much to do. The night before had been the prelude. Now it was time for the main act. I spent the morning tying up loose ends, making phone calls and reviewing my plan. Every detail had to be perfect. I wasn't just ending this nightmare. I was ensuring she felt the full weight of her choices. Around noon, Emily finally emerged, her face pale and puffy from crying. She avoided my eyes as she moved around the kitchen, making herself coffee. "We need to talk," she said finally, her voice small. I looked up from my laptop. "Do we?" "Yes," she said, a little more forcefully this time. "I know you're angry, but Stop," I said, cutting her off. "You don't get to explain this away, Emily. Not anymore." Her mouth snapped shut, and for a moment, she just stared at me. Then, she sighed heavily and sank into the chair across from me. "What do you want me to say?" she asked, her tone defensive. "That I'm sorry? Because I am. I messed up, Matt. But you're not perfect either. You work late, you're always stressed, and half the time, it feels like I'm invisible to you." Her attempt to shift the blame didn't surprise me, but it still stung. "Save it," I said coldly. "This isn't about me. It's about you and the choices you made. You could have come to me if you were unhappy. Instead, you decided to crawl into Jake's arms." She flinched at my words but didn't argue. I closed my laptop and leaned forward, my gaze piercing. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to pack a bag and leave. Today." Her eyes widened in shock. "What? Matt? No. This isn't up for debate," I said firmly. "You wanted Jake? Congratulations. You're free to have him. But you're not staying here." Tears welled up in her eyes again. "This is my home too." "Not anymore." I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the quiet street. "I'll be generous. You can stay at your mom's or a hotel. I don't care. But I'm meeting with the lawyer tomorrow, and we'll figure out the rest then." She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You're really going to throw away everything we've built? Just like that?" I turned to face her, my expression unreadable. "You threw it away, Emily. The second you let Jake into our lives, you destroyed everything. Don't act like this is my fault." She stared at me for a long moment, her hands trembling at her sides. Finally, she grabbed her coffee and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I let out a slow breath, trying to steady myself. The confrontation had been exhausting, but it was necessary. Now all I had to do was wait. And then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the tracking app. Emily had left the house. I watched her location move on the screen, heading in the direction I already knew too well. Jake's place. My hands tightened around the phone as the pieces of my plan fell into place. She thought she could run to him, that he'd provide some kind of safe haven. She didn't know what I had in store. I grabbed my keys and slipped out the door, my pulse steady and my mind focused. Emily and Jake had made their choices. Now it was my turn. The trap was set, and I was ready to spring it. I followed the tracking app, keeping my distance as Emily's little blue dot moved steadily toward Jake's place. It wasn't far. A 15-minute drive across town to a modest apartment complex where I'd already visited once. Not physically, of course. I'd done my homework online, looking up Jake's address, his work history, even his social media. By the time I parked across the street from the complex, my heart was pounding. Not from nerves, though, from anticipation. I waited, watching her car pull into the lot and park. She stepped out, looking around briefly before heading to Jake's apartment. She was wearing the same fake confidence she'd used on me last night, but I could see through it now. Every move she made screamed desperation. I let her get inside. Then I waited. 20 minutes passed. My phone buzzed with messages, screenshots, and confirmations from the private investigator I'd hired a few days earlier. A last-minute decision, but one that had paid off in ways I hadn't expected. Turns out Jake wasn't as squeaky clean as Emily probably believed. He wasn't just some gym buddy or harmless flirt. He had a history, a messy one. Financial troubles. A string of failed relationships, some of which overlapped suspiciously with married women. I had a file thick enough to bury him. I checked my watch. Time to move. Crossing the street, I walked toward the apartment complex with a calm I didn't entirely feel. My fists clenched and unclenched at my sides as I climbed the stairs to Jake's unit. I stopped in front of his door, pausing for a moment to gather myself. Then I knocked. The sound echoed through the hallway. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, footsteps. The door opened slightly, revealing Jake's face. His expression shifted from surprise to unease in an instant. "Matt," he said, his voice uncertain. "What are you doing here? Can we talk?" I asked, my tone measured. He hesitated, glancing back into the apartment. Now's not really a good time." I pushed the door open before he could stop me. Jake stumbled back, his hands raised defensively. "Hey man, wait." Inside, the apartment smelled faintly of cologne and takeout. Emily was standing in the living room, her eyes wide with shock. "Matt?" she stammered, clutching her phone like it was some kind of shield. I closed the door behind me, locking it with a quiet click. The sound seemed to echo in the tense silence. "Hello, Jake," I said, my voice low and steady. "Emily." Jake shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between me and Emily. "Look, man, I think you should go. This isn't what it looks like." I tilted my head, pretending to consider his words. "Really? Because it looks exactly like what I thought it would be. My wife and her lover, hiding out in a cheap apartment, hoping I wouldn't find out." Emily stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Matt, stop. You're blowing this out of proportion." "Am I?" I snapped, turning to face her. "I caught you. I have proof. And now you're here in his apartment, lying to my face again." Jake raised his hands, his voice shaky. "Okay. Look, let's all just calm down, all right? Nobody needs to do anything crazy." I turned to him, my eyes cold. "Crazy? You think this is crazy?" "No, Jake. Crazy is inviting another man's wife into your bed and thinking there wouldn't be consequences." Jake took a step back, his face pale. "I didn't." "Don't lie to me," I said sharply. "I've seen the messages, the photos. I know everything." Emily started crying then, soft, desperate sobs that grated against my nerves. "Matt, please. I didn't mean for this to happen. It was a mistake. A mistake." I laughed bitterly. "No, Emily. A mistake is forgetting our anniversary or burning dinner. This was a choice. Over and over again, you chose to betray me." Jake opened his mouth to speak, but I silenced him with a glare. You stay out of this. I'm not done with you yet. Emily sank onto the couch, her face buried in her hands. I pulled out my phone and set it on the coffee table. Here's how this is going to go. You're going to listen and you're not going to interrupt. Got it? Neither of them answered, but their silence was enough. I pressed play on a recording, a conversation Jake had had with another woman, one of his previous friends. The details weren't flattering. Emily's head shot up, her face a mix of confusion and horror. What is this? Jake's greatest hits, I said coldly. Turns out your little boyfriend here has a habit of getting involved with married women. And when things go south, he doesn't leave quietly. Jake looked panicked now, his hands shaking. You had no right. I had every right, I snapped. You came into my life, my marriage, and thought you could get away with it. Did you think I wouldn't fight back? Emily stared at Jake, the cracks in her trust spreading like fractures in glass. Jake, is this true? Jake stammered, searching for words, but I didn't give him the chance. Save it, I said. You're both liars, and now you'll both face the consequences. I stood, my voice calm but firm. Emily, I'll see you in court. And Jake, stay the hell away from my wife, or the next visit won't be so polite. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out, the door slamming shut behind me. The first move was mine, but the game wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. The drive home was quiet, the sound of my own breathing the only thing filling the void. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, but I forced myself to calm down. This wasn't the time for rage. That part of me, the part that wanted to scream, to lash out, to destroy everything they thought they could keep hidden, had already been unleashed. Now it was time for control. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the house. It looked the same as always, neatly trimmed hedges, the warm glow of porch lights illuminating the front door. But inside, everything was different. This wasn't a home anymore. I stepped inside, closing the door softly behind me. The silence wrapped around me like a blanket, suffocating but oddly comforting. I walked to the living room, sat down on the couch, and stared at the empty space where Emily had sat just the night before. Her voice, her laughter, her lies. All of it replayed in my mind like a broken record. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, breaking the stillness. A text from Emily. I need to talk to you. Please don't do this. I'm sorry. I stared at the message for a long moment before setting the phone back down. She didn't deserve an answer. Not yet. The next morning, I woke to another text. This one wasn't from Emily, it was from Jake. Hey man, look, I know we got off on the wrong foot last night. I just want to clear the air. Can we talk? The audacity of it made me laugh out loud. A sharp, bitter sound that echoed through the empty house. Jake wanted to clear the air? As if this was some minor misunderstanding. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the message to my lawyer. The meeting with her was scheduled for that afternoon. When I arrived, she greeted me with a firm handshake and a folder already thick with documents. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. I've reviewed everything you sent me, she said, spreading the screenshots and evidence across her desk. This is solid. There's no question about what's been going on. And the divorce? I asked, my voice steady. She nodded. We'll file immediately. With this level of evidence, the court will likely rule in your favor for both property division and emotional damages. But there's one thing we need to discuss. What's that? She leaned back in her chair, her expression serious. Do you want this to get messy? Because if you're ready to go scorched earth, we can. But it's going to get ugly, and fast. For a moment, I hesitated. There was a part of me that wanted to burn it all down, to make Emily and Jake regret every choice they'd made. But then I thought about what that would cost. Not just them, but me. No, I said finally. I don't want messy. I want final. I want this done quickly and cleanly. The lawyer nodded, her expression approving. Smart choice. Leave the destruction to me. When I got back home, Emily was waiting for me. She was sitting on the porch steps, her face pale and her hair pulled back into a messy bun. She looked like she hadn't slept. Matt, she said, standing as I approached. We need to talk. I stopped a few feet away, keeping my expression neutral. About what? You've said enough already. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't flinch. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I know I messed up. I hurt you. But please, don't throw everything away. We can fix this." "Fix it," I repeated, my tone cold. "You didn't mess up, Emily. You made choices. Over and over again, you chose him over me. And now you want to fix it? What does that even mean?" She stepped closer, her hands trembling. "I'll do anything, Matt. I'll cut Jake out of my life, go to counseling, whatever it takes. Just, please don't leave me." The desperation in her voice was real, but it didn't move me. "Not anymore. It's too late for that," I said, my voice firm. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. The papers will be filed this week." Her face crumbled, and she sank back onto the steps. "You don't mean that. You can't just give up on us." I crouched down so we were eye level, my gaze piercing hers. "You gave up on us the moment you let him into our lives. I'm just cleaning up the mess you made." She sobbed then, loud and broken, but I didn't stay to comfort her. I walked past her into the house, shutting the door behind me. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of control. The fallout had begun, and there was no turning back. Emily didn't leave the porch for hours. From the living room window, I could see her sitting there, hunched over, clutching her phone like it held the answers to a test she hadn't studied for. She didn't try to come back inside, and I didn't invite her. I had no intention of making this easier for her. By the evening, she was gone. Her car wasn't in the driveway anymore, and I didn't ask where she went. My phone buzzed a few times. Texts from her, voicemails I didn't bother listening to. I'd already blocked Jake. The silence of the house felt like both a blessing and a curse. It gave me room to breathe, to think, but it also reminded me of what I'd lost, or maybe what I'd never really had in the first place. I wasn't sad, though. Not anymore. The anger had burned through me, leaving something harder and sharper behind. The next morning, my lawyer called. "It's done," she said. "The papers are filed. Now it's just a matter of serving her." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Make sure it's official. No room for misinterpretation." She chuckled softly. "Don't worry. She'll know exactly where you stand." That afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Matt." Jake's voice came through the line, hesitant and strained. I didn't say anything at first, letting the silence stretch long enough for him to start second-guessing himself. "Look, man," he said finally, "I know you're pissed, and you have every right to be, but I wanted to apologize. I didn't mean for things to get this far." I let out a bitter laugh. "You didn't mean for what, Jake? To sleep with my wife? To lie to my face? To ruin my marriage?" His breath hitched. "It wasn't like that, I swear. Emily said things between you two were over, that she was staying for convenience. Don't," I snapped, my voice ice cold. "Don't you dare try to justify what you did by blaming her. You knew exactly what you were doing. You just didn't think you'd get caught." Jake's silence was answer enough. "Here's how this is going to work," I said, my tone steady and deliberate. "You're going to stay away from me, from my house, from my life. If you so much as breathe in my direction again, I'll bury you. Do you understand?" "Yeah," he muttered. "I get it." "Good." I hung up before he could say another word. The next few days were a whirlwind of paperwork, meetings with my lawyer, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing Emily's world was crumbling. The day she was served was almost anticlimactic. I wasn't home when it happened, deliberately so, but when I returned, there was a note taped to the front door in her handwriting. "Matt, please call me. I'll do anything to fix this. Don't let it end like this. Emily." I tore the note down and threw it in the trash without a second thought. I wasn't done yet. The final piece of my plan came together when I sent Jake's file, his history, the incriminating messages, and every sordid detail to his employer. A little anonymous email with enough evidence to ensure he'd be answering questions for weeks. I didn't need to know what happened next. It was enough to know the seed had been planted. Emily tried calling again that night. This time I answered. "Matt," she said, her voice breaking. "Please, I can't do this without you. I made a mistake, but I love you. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, start over, anything you want." Her desperation was palpable, but it didn't move me. "You love me?" I asked, my voice calm. "Funny. That's not what your text to Jake said." "Matt, please." "No," I said firmly. "We're done. You made your choice, Emily. Now you get to live with it." She sobbed on the other end of the line, but I hung up before she could say more. The satisfaction I felt wasn't the kind that brought joy. It was cold, empty, but necessary. The pieces were falling into place, and the end was finally in sight. The night after our last conversation, the house was silent again. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like the aftermath of a storm. Emily's presence lingered faintly in the spaces she used to fill, but it wasn't her warmth I missed. It was the idea of who I thought she was. That person didn't exist anymore. The next morning, I got a text from my lawyer. Emily's lawyer reached out. "She's willing to settle. No contest." I stared at the message, the weight of it sinking in. It was over. All that was left now was to sign the papers and watch her walk away for good. But I wasn't done. Not yet. Emily showed up at the house later that day, uninvited but not unexpected. She looked exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed and her hair disheveled. "Matt," she said softly, standing on the porch. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside without a word, letting her enter. She hesitated for a moment, as if she thought I might slam the door in her face. When I didn't, she walked into the living room and sat on the edge of the couch, her hands wringing together. "I got the papers," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I signed them." I sat in the armchair across from her, my face unreadable. "Good." Her gaze dropped to her hands. I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. I know I can't fix it, but I need you to know that I regret it. Hurting you, betraying you. Stop," I said, cutting her off. "You're not here for closure, Emily. You're here because you have nothing left. You burned every bridge, and now you're realizing there's no way back." She flinched, tears welling in her eyes. "That's not true. I still love you, Matt." I laughed. A quiet, bitter sound. "You don't love me. You love the idea of me, the safety I gave you, the life I built for us. But the second you thought you could do better, you threw me away." "That's not fair," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Fair?" I asked, my voice rising slightly. "You want to talk about fair, Emily? What part of this was fair? You lied to me. You made me doubt myself. You let me believe I wasn't enough while you ran off with Jake behind my back. And now, when you've lost everything, you want me to save you." Her tears spilled over, but I didn't stop. I needed her to hear this, to feel it. "I gave you everything," I continued, my voice steady, "and you threw it away. So don't sit there and tell me you love me. Because if you did, we wouldn't be here." She broke down then, sobbing into her hands. For a moment, I almost felt something. Pity, maybe, but it wasn't enough to change anything. "I'm moving forward, Emily," I said finally. "Without you. The papers are signed. This is over." She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "You'll regret this," she whispered. "One day, you'll look back and realize you gave up on us too soon." I stood, my expression cold. "No, Emily. I'll look back and realize I finally chose myself over someone who never deserved me." She didn't argue. She just sat there, broken, as I walked to the door and opened it. "Goodbye, Emily," I said, my voice firm. She hesitated for a moment, then rose unsteadily to her feet. She walked past me without another word, stepping out onto the porch. When the door closed behind her, I felt a strange sense of relief. Not joy, not triumph, just relief. I'd won. Not because I'd hurt her or Jake or because I'd exposed their lies, but because I'd finally taken control. The storm had passed, and for the first time in months, the air felt clear. Weeks later, as I sat in the quiet of my new apartment, I thought about everything I'd been through. The betrayal, the anger, the heartbreak. It had changed me, hardened me in ways I hadn't expected. But it hadn't broken me. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: trust is fragile. Once it's broken, it's almost impossible to repair. And love without trust? That's just a lie waiting to be uncovered. For anyone out there reading this, wondering if they should fight to save something that's already shattered, my advice is simple. Don't. Walk away. Choose yourself. because sometimes the only way to win is to let go.